TF2 is an old ass game, and behind this game is 10 years worth of content updates. And one of the most prevalent characters in the entire game is the Scout, the annoying asshole. And I can think of no better place to start this series, because let's be honest, the Scout maybe has had the most bullshit weapons in this entire game. Starting off in the wee days of 2007, Scout started off with a simple scattergun, pistol, and bat. And if you didn't know that, then you should play TF2. It's fun. But the first real changes to Scout would come in the Scout update of 2009. The weapons added to the game were the Force of Nature, Bonk Atomic Punch, and the Sandman. Now, if you used to go to the outhouse to take a shit, then you know one of those weapons was way more tutorials than the other ones. And if you weren't playing back then I'll give you a hint. The Force of Nature was worse on release than it is today, and the Bonk Atomic Punch hasn't really changed that much. It should be no surprise to anybody who knows a lot about this game that obviously the Sandman is going to be the broken one here, but the question is just how broken. See, originally the Sandman released with the ability to stun anybody from any range, which would be absolutely crazy, but it takes away your double jump. So is being able to stun an enemy better than having a double jump a core essential part of the class? Yes. You don't believe me? Fucking look at this. Look at this bonk dodge. He comes up out of the water here, hits the heavy, puts 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 meat shots at him before the heavy can even get unstunned. Next flip, he hits a Doomman with his ball and has time to run all the way around, double jump to him, and put 2 meat shots at him before the Doomman becomes unstunned. Oh yeah, and did I mention that this could completely stun Uber Push, the most powerful thing in the entire game? Needless to say, this weapon was really overpowered on launch. So much so that I would say this is the best Scout weapon to ever exist. You guys better fucking strap in, because Jesus Christ, is it going to be a roller coaster for the TF2 team trying to balance this one out over the next 10 years. Thankfully, Valve quickly pulled their heads out of their asses on this one, and less than a month after the Sandman's release, gave the Sandman 2 major nerfs. The first one gave the Sandman a 50% damage reduction on all enemies who got stunned by the Sandman, and they added a minimum distance that you were required to get to stun, so you couldn't just stun from point blank range anymore. And the very next change that the Scout would get was also to the Sandman in the classless update. Because it doesn't focus on a class. How much money do Valve devs make? Well, they must have really been smoking something, because they decided to buff the weapon for literally no reason at all. In the classless update, they decided to make it so stun players now took 75% of all incoming damage, which was raised from 50%. And the minimum distance to stun was reduced, and the negative attribute was changed from no double jump to -30 max health. These were crazy buffs for the weapon, which did not need it at all. It was already a straight upgrade to the bat. I do need to mention here that this was a trade-off for all of this, for these buffs. The Sandman did get a change so that it now could no longer stun uber-charged enemies, and this is a really significant nerf. I don't think it makes up for all the buffs that it got in this update, but it definitely is worth mentioning. In December, the TF2 team would take another crack at balancing this weapon, and they would do an okay job here at least. They would make it so that the Sandman would only stun at a max range hit, and all the shorter ones would then force the enemy into a third-person fleeing state, bringing the Sandman much closer to the more iconic broken weapon it's remembered as. Finally, on January 6, 2010, the TF2 team would give it its last major change for almost 7 years, reducing the max health penalty from 30 max health to 15. And this version of the Sandman was by far the most iconic one, terrorizing people for many, many years. After the entire mess that was the Sandman, the TF2 team decided it was time to kick back their feet, lay down, sit back, and release yet another iconically bullshit weapon into Scout's loadout. Unlike the Sandman, however, the Criticola was actually fairly balanced on release. The community seemed pretty mixed about it, but it seemed an overall pretty balanced weapon. Very soon after, the Short Stop would be released, and their synergy was immediately recognized. giving birth to one of the most notorious and long-standing combos in the game.
Hello there, this is Icy Tooney here with another TF2 gameplay video. In this video, I'm going to be playing as the Scout here on CP Badlands, one of my favorite maps, and I'm going to be using the Shortstop as my primary weapon here and the Critical as my secondary weapon. So a bit of a different setup than I would normally use for my Scout, but it's a lot of fun to use these two weapons in combination because they do complement each other quite well, but I'll be talking about that a little bit later in the video.
The Shortstop is very similar to how it is today, and it's viewed in generally the exact same way as it was back in 2010. It was seen as a viable side grade to the Scattergun, trading the Scattergun's high damage potential for more consistent mid-range damage. Unfortunately, the Shortstop would be completely overshadowed by the new Scout secondary, Mad Milk. Following the themes of just letting classes have banner charges whenever the fuck they want, the Mad Milk was an incredibly powerful and versatile weapon that easily became Scout's best tool. In fact, I would argue that it is even better than the almighty Jarate. And that's not saying that Jarate is worse than Mad Milk per se. In fact, I would say just based on the effects, Jarate is better than the Mad Milk. It's just based on who it is given to. See, while Jarate is stupid powerful, it being on Sniper means that it's not as strong as it could have been. For example, if you're throwing the Jarate, you will never follow it up as a Sniper. It's just not possible. So you're pretty much dependent on your team to follow up for you, which in a pub, let's be honest, there's almost no coordination and it's almost entirely left up to chance if your team decides to push in at that time. Also, due to your lack of mobility, you can't really maneuver around the map very well to throw it on this exact target that you want to, or in this exact area that you want to. Pretty much the area that you are in right now is where the Jarate is always going to be. But Scout has incredible mobility, meaning he's able to go pretty much wherever he wants to as long as there's no sentry gun waiting to gun him down, meaning that the Scout can always be in the area that the Mad Milk is most needed in. On top of that, the Mad Milk will almost never be wasted, because the Scout can follow up on his own Mad Milk very easily. So if Scout wasn't already broken enough, he now has an item that is potentially better than Jarate just sitting in his secondary slot. And in my opinion, the Mad Milk is easily Scout's best weapon at this point in time. Now, I can totally understand the argument of the Sandman being pretty much a free 1v1 kill for literally no cost. That's true, but the Mad Milk can not only win a 1v1 for no cost, it can win the entire team fight. Following the Mad Milk, no major changes would come to the Scout until the Australian Christmas update. This update brought two new melee weapons for the Scout. Unfortunately, they both were kind of ass, so nobody used them. Plus, the power of the Sandman was so great that no amount of benefit would ever be worth giving it up. Also in this update, the Shortstop slowdown effect was removed, which in typical Valve fashion, never fucking worked in the first place. In between the Australian Christmas update and the Uber update, Scout would only receive one meaningful change, which was a nerf to the Mad Milk going from 75% healed to 60% healed. Definitely a nerf, but it definitely needed much more than this, which it will never ever receive. After that, there were no more changes, all the way up until the Uber update, one of the most influential updates of all time. In it, Scout would receive the Soda Popper, Winger, and Atomizer. The Soda Popper was recognized almost instantly as just the better force of nature. It's very similar to how it is today, but back then, you would build hype simply by running around so you didn't even have to go shoot people, and hype would make you do mini crits, which I would argue is probably better. However, the Winger was seen literally exactly the same as it is today, just a kind of underwhelming side grade to the pistol that is worse in almost every situation. As for the Atomizer, it kind of falls into this black hole that the Boston Basher and the Candy Cane also fall into. See, it definitely has its uses. It's just the Sandman is so overwhelmingly powerful that it's very hard to justify trading it out. Actually, I just looked at the items and stuff, and it turns out the Sun on a Stick was in between Australian Christmas and the Uber update, but I forgot about it because come on, it's the Sun on a Stick. Who gives a fuck? Also, the Fan of War. God damn it. Soon after, the Shortstop will get a 50% longer reload time, and this hurts the weapon more than you might think. See, if you use the Sandman nowadays, you'll notice that even if you're hitting most of your shots, nothing seems to be dying. And it feels like you just straight up don't have the firepower to take a lot of the fights you normally could. Well, But having that very fast reload speed helped out a lot with this because it would reload your entire clip. And don't forget, the shortstop fires really quickly. So even though you probably wouldn't kill somebody with your first volley of shots, that fast reload time meant that you could get another round out very quickly. But this longer reload time just gave enemies more and more time to slip away. Or kill you. They could do that too. Jumping from the Uber update, we go straight to the Pyromania update. That update introduced us to the Pretty Boy's pocket pistol and...
Oh, no, this can't be.
And this weapon. This weapon was absolute dog shit. Yeah, everyone remembers the old Babyface's blaster that was really broken, but nobody remembers the old Babyface's blaster, which sucked ass. In fact, I believe it is easily Scout's worst primary ever. For starters, your movement penalty was at 87% with zero boost, which is slower than Demo Man. On top of that, you basically just didn't have an option to jump at all, because if you jumped, not double jumped, just jumped, then you would lose all of your boost immediately and go right back to moving at the same speed of a Demo Man. Now this alone was enough to just cripple the weapon, but for some reason it also had a 30% damage penalty. All of this just straight up killed the weapon, and it was pretty much seen as the joke shotgun for many years. While the Babyface's blaster was a disappointment, the Pretty Boy's pocket pistol was seen as a pretty viable side grade to the pistol. It essentially traded DPS for health. It gave you an additional 15 health in exchange for a 25% slower firing speed. It also came with two other weird side effects. It made you immune to fall damage, and it made you take 50% more fire damage. Both of these stats didn't really affect the weapon too much, but it did mean if there were just a ton of pyros on the enemy team, should probably stay away from this one. It's not the only thing the Scout would get out of this update though. Also in the Pyromania update, the Criticola was buffed to give the Scout a 25% faster movement speed when deployed, and it would increase its duration from 6 to 8 seconds. This was a pretty generous buff and would pretty much bring the Criticola into viability. If it wasn't for, literally 5 days after this update, the Flying Guillotine would also be introduced. Now, the Flying Guillotine could have been a fair weapon, a balanced weapon. On paper, that's what it should have been. A projectile that, when thrown, does 50 damage plus some bleed in the end that recharges fairly quickly. Yeah, so this weapon was just completely made to exclusively be used with the Sandman and never anything else. It allowed the Scout to get, essentially for free, 150 plus damage on people for literally no risk at all. I want to point out that the Cleaver was never the overpowered or broken one. It was only made overpowered and broken by the Sandman. But yeah, in the state that it was released, it was crazy. It allowed Scout to basically win every single fight that he ever went up against as long as he could hit his Sandman balls. This synergy pushed out a lot of other Scout secondaries, unfortunately, because basically, if you were running the Sandman, which 90% of Scouts were, then the Cleaver was just the obvious choice. And if you weren't, then you would probably be running Mad Milk or something like that, or maybe a pistol. Luckily, Valve would see this and buff at least one secondary into viability. In July of 2013, the Criticola would get yet another buff. This time, the damage you took would be reduced from mini crits to just a 25% damage vulnerability when it was active. Now, this works out to just a 10% damage reduction on the damage you actually take from the Criticola. However, mini crits don't have damage fall off, which basically means that you can't shoot the Scout from far away anymore. You would have to get up close to actually do damage. Also in this patch, the shortstop would get buffed to grant plus 20% healing from all sources. We'd also get an 80% push vulnerability, which just seems funny more than anything. The shortstop was definitely underwhelming ever since its nerf back in 2010, and this was a pretty good buff to give it. Because of these two buffs, while the Criticola and the shortstop had definitely shared a strong synergy before, I believe this was the true beginning of the real power of the Criticola shortstop combo. But deep in the layers of Valve, something sinister was brewing. They remembered the dogshit that they released into the world upon 2012. And you know how Valve always goes overboard with their nerfs? Well, the same thing goes for their buffs.
You imbecile! You've doomed us all! Apologies.
We did it! We did it because we're best friends!
Let go of me!
Okay, so why was this broken? First off, the crippling speed penalty that was applied to you on 0 boost was now completely removed. Now, the slowest you could go was just 120% of your speed, which is still faster than every other class in the game. They also completely removed the 30% damage penalty, and the jumping penalty that made you lose all your boost previously was now changed so that it only applied to double jumps and it only took 25% of your boost. Valve basically removed every bad thing about this shotgun and effectively made it the best shotgun in the entire game. To this day, it is the only shotgun that is objectively better than stock. On top of that, it only made Scout's annoying combos worse, since with the Sandman, you effectively could always follow up on your balls wherever you hit them. Needless to say, this monster would go on to terrorize the game. In December of that year, the Criticola would again get buffed, lowering the damage taken from 25% to just 10%. This was absolutely busted, and there was no reason that they needed to change this. The Criticola was a weapon that really benefited from the Babyface's Blaster's buff because you could effectively drink the Criticola and all of the debuffs from the Babyface would go away, and you could fill up that meter much easier. And once that meter was full, you could run around at nearly 200%, making you nearly unhittable and being able to dish out mini crits. Also in the update, the Soda Popper would receive a bit of a rework. Valve decided it was just too powerful for the Soda Popper to have mini crits on it, so they changed the hype effect to now give 5 double jumps. This on itself is probably a bit of a nerf, since honestly having mini crits is just more generally useful than having 5 jumps. However, Valve also changed the hype meter so that now you could just right click and use it whenever you wanted and it wouldn't just activate randomly. Before this update, you would just be running around and then randomly the hype would start whether or not you were near enemies or not, but now you could just hang on to the hype until you needed it in a certain fight. After the laundry list of changes that were made to Scout in 2013, 2014 turned out to be a pretty dead year for him. The only gun that was added was the backscatter, which turned out to be pretty underwhelming, and other than that there was no major changes to Scout's actually good weapons. In fact, Scout would continue to receive almost no love from the dev team until the Gunmetal update. I'll go ahead and get the big one out of the way. Valve had seen the Babyface's Blaster wreak havoc on the game, and it was obvious it needed a nerf. The only question was how to nerf it. Now, these devs were professionals, people who had worked on TF2 for multiple years at this point, so even though they did make the mistake of over buffing it, certainly they wouldn't make the mistake of over nerfing it. Oh wait, no, this is Valve. Lose boost on hit. This was a serious nerf no matter how much damage it took to lower your boost. However, Valve just decided that all Scout needed to do was sniff a bullet for him to lose all of his boost. Infamously, it only took 2 shots from a pistol to bring the Scout from full boost to 0. The Valve giveth and the Valve taketh away. The amount of boost you lost was also increased on double jump, but this hardly mattered compared to the first change. After that bombshell of a nerf, they also reworked the Pretty Boys pocket pistol. The Pretty Boys would no longer give you 15 max health, but in exchange for that, you would heal for every shot that you hit. Unfortunately, you would also take plus 20% more damage while the weapon was active, which is double that of the Criticola by the way, and the Criticola gives you a movement speed boost and mini crits. It seemed in this update they were getting rid of a lot of passives that Scout had because they also got rid of the passive effects on the shortstop, making them only work when the weapon was out and active, but the shortstop is Scout's primary, so this didn't really matter so much because you would pretty much have it out always. Following these changes, the scattergun obviously took the Babyface's place as the go-to Scout primary to use. As for the Pretty Boys, it was turned into absolute dog shit, and it was pretty much a useless weapon. So in the December Tough Break update, Valve would give it a little love, buffing the health on hit from plus 3 to plus 5. The only other change is that the Rap Assassin finally got some love from Valve. The Rap Assassin had been arguably Scout's worst melee weapon for years at this point, largely because it just stayed in the Sandman's shadow. Why would you want to deal some bleed to an enemy when you could just stun them for multiple seconds, or better yet hit them with a cleaver combo for 150 damage? The ball would now shatter on impact, doing a small amount of damage in a tiny little area, and it would now recharge 25% faster compared to the Sandman. Unfortunately, in this state, the Sandman still completely overshadowed the Rap Assassin, which is actually interesting because this is the exact same version of the Rap Assassin that we have today, which is arguably Scout's best melee weapon. But that just goes to show the power of the Sandman. Funnily enough, while doing research for this video, I came across a Reddit thread that literally suggested this exact change for the weapon. Fast forwarding to the Meet Your Match update, Scout would receive 3 substantial nerfs to the Shortstop, Soda Popper, and the Criticola. The Criticola would receive a 2-second mark for death period after its effect is ended, which was good because the Criticola was fucking busted and absolutely needed a nerf, but this definitely was not the substantial nerf that was needed. After that, the Soda Popper was changed to build the hype on hit rather than running around, so this was just a slight nerf because honestly just hitting somebody wasn't too hard, but back then you could just kind of run around and you wouldn't actually have to do anything to get the hype, so this was definitely a nerf, but definitely not a big one. And finally, the Shortstop was the one that was absolutely just gutted by this update. The healing bonus worked really well with the Shortstop because it effectively made for a survivability build. The Shortstop became just underwhelming, and the shove did not help. Following this update, there was just one major update left to cover, the Jungle Inferno update. Probably one of the most influential updates with its balance changes, at least to Scout. Starting off with the Sandman. The Sandman was an iconic TF2 weapon, dominating Scout's melee slot for years, but in this update, they gave it a nerf that would shatter it. They removed its ability to stop players from fighting back and to stun people at all, pretty much nerfing this weapon straight into the ground. The Flying Guillotine was also changed because, well, there's literally no other way that Scout can actually add a stun onto people that works with the Cleaver. So with the Sandman now gone, it made no sense for the Cleaver to stay how it was. The Criticola would also be hit hard in this update, with them removing pretty much every single buff that they gave it over the years. Another weapon that was changed in this update was the Atomizer, a weapon I haven't really talked about up until now. This is because most melee weapons were straight up just outshined by the Sandman, so it didn't really make sense to talk about the Atomizer, but the Atomizer was probably the second best option for Scout up until this point. This is because you didn't have to have the Atomizer out back then, it was just a passive that was on Scout at all times. But unlike the Soda Popper, which glowed purple and literally screamed, "I have multiple jumps," you had no indication that the person you were fighting was using the Atomizer until it was too late. This is really effective against soldiers and Demoman, where having that surprise third jump could really act as a fuck you to those classes. This wasn't such a big deal since again, the Sandman was just flat out better than the Atomizer was, but I think Valve saw that once they nerfed the Sandman, the Atomizer would then become the clear dominant melee. So they preemptively nerfed it. The nerf wasn't too bad, it still retained most of its function, it's just now that the surprise third jump just couldn't happen anymore. The last notable change was the Pretty Boy's pocket pistol. This pistol had been nerfed into the ground a couple years earlier, but in this update they gave it a 15% faster firing speed and increased the health recovered on hit from 5 to up to +7. In exchange for this, they removed the clip size by 25% and removed the wear never takes fall damage while active. They also removed the +20% damage vulnerability from all sources, which was another huge buff for the weapon. After this update, the Sandman would become one of the more useless items in the game, which was a big fall from grace. The Criticola would also fall, mainly because of the marked for death effect being added and the removal of the 25% move speed. Also because of the nerf to the Sandman, a lot of other Scout melees had the gates kind of open for them, especially the Rap Assassin, which saw a lot more use. The Pretty Boys also took a huge swing, going from effectively useless to by far the best pistol. That faster firing speed made it a good finisher, despite the clip size decrease. Also, the healing on the Pretty Boys was a pretty nice bonus, and it was also bugged at this time so that it gave +7 no matter what. Though this bug would be fixed and the healing would eventually be reduced in the Blue Moon update, this was still a very powerful pistol. So after all that, at what point was Scout his absolute best? It's very tempting to say, well, when the Sandman was first released, this is probably one of the most broken weapons to ever grace TF2. But if you go then Scout loses a lot of his combos. For example, the notorious Cleaver combo isn't there, and he doesn't have access to Mad Milk. While there are a couple options to pick from, I think easily the best time to be a Scout was in between February 7th of 2014 and July 2nd, 2015. During this time, many weapons had its peak, most notably the Babyface's Blaster, which was absolutely broken, but also the Soda Popper was really good, and it's still really good. The Shortstop was also a really good alternative side grade to the Scattergun. On top of that, the Criticola was in its absolute best state, and anybody who was playing back then knows how broken that was. And while the Sandman wasn't necessarily its absolute strongest self, I mean, it was still really good, and it paired with the Flying Guillotine to make a deadly combo. While the Mad Milk wasn't at its strongest, it was still really strong because that nerf was nowhere near what it needed. So yeah, with one absolutely busted primary and two really good solid options apart from the scattergun, two of the most broken secondaries in the entire game, and one secondary that paired really well with the Sandman, as well as just straight up having the Sandman, not even pairing it with the guillotine, but just the sheer power of it. I think this is easily the best time it ever was to be a scout.